Hey folks, it's Pastor Brian again with the Word Above All station, and we're going to be looking at Romans 8 verses 31 to 32. This is what it says. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who is against us? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him over for us all, how will he not also with him freely give us all things? Now, Paul says here, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who is against us? So what can we possibly say to the things that Paul has already told us? He told us in verses 26 and 27 that the Holy Spirit intercedes for us according to the will of God. He said in verse 28 that God is causing all things to work together for our good. He told us in verse 29 that God has foreknown us, meaning he has chosen us to salvation before the foundation of the world. He also told us that those very same people that were foreknown were also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son. Further, he told us that those predestined were called, and those called were justified, and those justified were glorified. Now, we haven't actually received a glorified body yet, but it's so sure that Paul puts it in the past tense. It's as good as done. So, what can we say to this incredible grace of God? What then should we say to these things? Well, I don't know what to say. I'm really left speechless. The grace of God is so staggering, so amazing, so incredible that it defies the ability to articulate with human speech. It blows me away. In fact, it had this effect on me to such a degree that I wrote a book called Overwhelmed by Grace because of the amazing nature of the grace of God towards us. But that's just the beginning. Verse 31 leads us to verse 32. And in verse 32, Paul goes even further. He argues from the greater to the lesser. So let's look at the greater argument. He says, if God did not spare his own son, but delivered him over for us all. Now that's the greatest possible gift that God could have given. He gave his own son, his one and only, the only begotten Son of God. God gave him over as a sacrifice for human sin. He emptied the treasures of heaven when he gave Christ to this world to die for sinners. So that's the greatest possible gift. So if God didn't spare his own son, but delivered him over for us all, here's the lesser, how will he not also with him freely give us all things? If God gave the greatest possible gift, won't he give these small, almost insignificant gifts that we need between the time of our conversion and the time of entering into eternal glory? That's the argument. If God gave the greatest possible gift to save us, now that we are saved, won't he give everything else that we need to make it to heaven, to be with Christ forever? And of course, the answer is, of course, he will do that. So the all things that are included here would include things like the grace we need to persevere in faith to the end. It would include the power we need to live the Christian life, the power we need to be a Christian witness. It would include the grace we need to suffer tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword, like he mentions in verse 35. It would include all of the things that we need as Christians. Folks, if I were to spend $500,000 to buy a new home, I think at such an investment, I would be a fool if I didn't also spend a little bit here and there just to maintain the house that I had bought. I would be crazy if I bought this house at such an expense and then just let it go to pot. Never mowed the lawn, never fixed anything that broke, never water the lawn, never paint walls that go bad, never replace the carpet when it gets dingy. Any homeowner that puts a significant outlay of money to buy a home is going to maintain that home, and at such a minor cost, really. And that's the idea here. If God spent such an exorbitant cost to purchase you, won't he spend the little bit that he needs in order to maintain you in faith and provide the things that you need to get to glory. God gave the greatest. He'll certainly give all lesser things between our conversion and entrance into eternal heaven.